Time is a flat circle. Okay, I know I've gotten a lot of mileage out of True Detective Season 1 on this channel. I mean, even my channel avatar is a parody of a famous scene from that show, but there is probably no more accurate or concise way of describing the career of Jon Jones than to say that time is a flat circle. We are over a decade removed from Jon's infamous hit-and-run incident, and he is once again without a belt, and once again facing legal consequences for a vehicular incident. And that is to say nothing of the myriad similar events that have happened between these 2 points in time. Now, the situations aren't exactly the same, but to use another famous quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. We'll get to some of the differences that set these recent developments apart from others in his career, but the main difference, from my perspective, is that Jon may have finally done enough damage to his already tarnished legacy that it is now beyond repair. Let's take a step back, though. This past Saturday at the post-fight press conference for UFC on ABC Hill vs. Roundtree Jr., Dana White officially announced that Jon Jones had retired from MMA and Tom Aspinall was now the undisputed UFC heavyweight champ. This announcement was then confirmed by Jon himself through a potentially AI-generated retirement post on Twitter. Seriously, it's such a vague post that it's not worth reading in detail, even if it would increase the length of the video and give me more ad revenue. These announcements capped off what was one of the most farcical title reigns in UFC history, one in which Jon Jones held up the division for over 2 years by pursuing a fight with a 42-year-old Stipe Miocic instead of facing deserving contenders, namely Tom Aspinall. And it's important to make one point explicitly clear here. Jon Jones 100% ducked Aspinall. Jon preferred giving up his belt and fleeing MMA in general rather than fighting Tom Aspinall, something Tom actually predicted several months ago.
Since I won that fight, he's gone completely quiet, and he'll continue to go completely quiet about me until he retires, because there's no way on earth that he's going to fight me. Not a chance. I will retire Jon Jones without even fighting him.
In the process of retiring, Jon vindicated every critic who had spent the last 19 months accusing him of ducking Aspinall. More than that, he validated a number of criticisms that have been levied against him for his entire career. Because this wasn't the first time Jon avoided a fight. He refused to fight Chael Sonnen on short notice, which was partially responsible for the UFC having to cancel the entire UFC 151 event. He refused to rematch Alexander Gustafsson after their Hall of Fame fight at UFC 165, even though that was the most desired fight in MMA at the time. He refused to rematch Dominic Reyes after UFC 247, despite the fact that it is almost unanimously agreed upon that he lost that fight, and was only given the nod by the judges due to a bizarre quirk of the scoring criteria used by the Texas Athletic Commission. Jon subsequently vacated his light heavyweight belt and went on a 3-year hiatus from the sport to allegedly bulk up for a move to heavyweight. During that time period, he also ducked Francis Ngannou, waiting until Ngannou was literally out of the promotion to finally move to heavyweight and win the vacant heavyweight belt against grappling savant Ciryl Gane. This fucking guy said he wouldn't fight Daniel Cormier at heavyweight because he believed the size difference would give DC too much of an advantage.
I think my greatest chance of losing would be to a guy like Daniel Cormier, with giving him a power and strength advantage over me. It just doesn't make sense.
I'll grant you that this is more of a what-if scenario than a true duck, but it came from Jon himself.
And to give him a size advantage, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Then we have the last 2 years of his career that were spent ducking legitimate contenders. It wasn't just Tom Aspinall either. It should be acknowledged that Sergey Pavlovich had a legitimate claim to a title shot when he was passed over from Miocic in 2023. Pavlovich would later go on to get KO'd by Tom Aspinall in an interim title fight, but I think it's still worth mentioning what was taken from him. If the UFC and Jones weren't fixated on Jon fighting Stipe for some reason, Pavlovich probably would have gotten a title shot. He might have even won. Sure, he might have lost as well. And even if he won, he probably would have gotten flatlined by Aspinall in his first title defense, but he was never given that opportunity, even when he was the one who most deserved it. This aspect of the Jon Jones heavyweight arc gets left out of the narrative. It screwed over the whole division. Alexander Volkov made this point relatively recently when he argued that if Jon wasn't holding the belts up, he and others might have already gotten a crack at the title. Due to the UFC's leniency with Jon, these men have been unfairly denied even the possibility of a title shot for years. Of course, Tom himself got screwed over as well, perhaps more than anyone else. He was forced to gain the dubious honor of becoming the longest reigning interim champ in UFC history, and has spent nearly a year sitting on his hands while Jones does shit like going to Thailand to ride on scooters and smell men's hair. The truly frustrating thing is that this was all easily avoidable. I've made the point a few times in other videos, but they simply never should have rebooked the Stipe fight after Jon got injured in October of 2023. The first booking was terrible, but you can at least come up with a vague defense about Stipe being the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time to justify it. The rebooking of that fight was straight up inexcusable and indefensible. It should have never happened. Unfortunately, we live in the reality where the fight was rebooked. Even still, I don't think it was completely unavoidable for this fight to turn into the radioactive disgrace to Jon's legacy that it ended up becoming. Most of the blame for that turn of events can be placed on the way that Jon handled the issue of fighting Tom Aspinall. Jon was incredibly disrespectful to Tom Aspinall in the lead up to UFC 309 and outright dismissive of the idea of even fighting him.
If you defeat him, will you defend your belt against Aspinall, who has the interim title?
More than likely not. More than likely not. I'm going to call him this, fight the nobody. But if I'm being completely honest, I feel like Tom's been such an asshole that I don't want to do business with him.
What specifically has he said or done to make him an asshole?
There's just a lot of people on his nuts right now.
But what has he done, though?
Coming up with Jon Jones t-shirts.
This led to a tremendous amount of fan backlash that, frankly, could have been avoided. All Jon had to do was show a little respect for Tom. Didn't even have to commit to fighting him. Jon could have just said that he respects Tom as a fighter and thinks he'll have a bright future, but he wasn't looking past Stipe Miocic at the time. Would people still have accused him of ducking Tom? Probably. But I think the tiniest bit of humility, or simply acknowledging Tom's claim to a title shot, would have mitigated much of the damage. Instead, Jon acted like Tom wasn't fit to hold his jock, and he'd rather fight Alex Pereira or Jamal Hill, which only fanned the flames of the fan outrage.
You know, one of the guys that really gets my attention is Alex Pereira. Fighting Pereira for the Banff belt, that'd be cool. And if the UFC doesn't want that to happen, because ultimately it's the boss's decision, then it won't happen. And I'll just move on with my life.
Why exactly Jon took umbrage with Tom is unclear. The inner machinations of Jon's mind are an enigma. This is the same guy who fabricated a fake grudge with Stipe over completely non-existent comments he thought Miocic made about his kids, then later forgave Stipe for the comments that Stipe never made. It's entirely possible that Jon has created a similarly fabricated beef with Tom over comments Aspinall never made. It's also possible Jon hates him because Tom committed the unforgivable sin of publicly stating that he thinks he could beat Jon.
I'm the best heavyweight in the world. If you think you are, let's settle it. Simple as that.
And while I did say earlier that this situation wasn't unavoidable, that's really only in theory. In practice, I don't think Jon is capable of showing the kind of humility to do what I suggested. The fact that the fans merely thought Tom could beat him was likely perceived as a personal affront by Jon. In retrospect, I think this was the point of no return for Jon's legacy. There was no way to undo the damage done here, other than by fighting Tom, or by hoping that Tom lost to somebody else in the meantime. As the months went by, Jon would only double down in his position, and the future of the heavyweight title remained in limbo. For a while, it seemed as if Jon was intent on doing anything other than fighting Tom Aspinall. He said he needed 6 months to prepare. Then he went to do a reality TV show in Thailand. He rage-baited fans on Twitter and talked about how he was living his best life and didn't need to fight. He generally appeared to be non-committal about the idea of fighting at all, let alone fighting Tom.
I don't know what life holds as far as fighting and competing.
And he made a number of what I would call soft launches of his retirement.
Is Jon Jones retired? Is he fighting again?
I don't want to say that I'm retired because fighting's in my blood. Right now, I could really care less about fighting.
He later tweeted that he had informed the UFC of his terms and intentions, but didn't know why they were holding up the announcement. Largely, it seemed like he was content to just sit out, and he was portraying the UFC as the ones holding things up. At the time, it was hard to decipher what was going on. Was this all a big negotiation tactic? Why couldn't the UFC book the fight? It was a common opinion that they were putting Jones versus Aspinall on the back burner as a bargaining chip for the next broadcast deal.
All the stuff that leads you 100% to unfortunately believe, if you're as cynical on this as as we are, I guess, because we talk about this every couple days on air, is I think they're holding it as the sweetener in the negotiations for the new TV deal. And it's not an original thought. We've talked about it before. I don't think until they sign for that new deal or multiple deals will we see legitimate movement on when this is going to be.
On the flip side, we also heard from people like Ariel Helwani that the UFC weren't the ones holding up negotiations.
If for whatever reason it falls apart and we never get to see Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, the UFC is not to blame. They have made every effort in very good faith to make this fight happen.
He said that they had met all of Jon's demands, but he still wouldn't agree to the fight.
He gave them a number. They met the number. He said thanks, but no thanks. That's what happened.
Even up to the day of Jon's retirement, it still wasn't really clear what was going on or why. There is the obvious and undeniable fact that Jon Jones didn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. I really do not think there is a credible argument against it at this point. Jon didn't want any part of this fight.
What would it take to fight Tom Aspinall?
Said something real wild on off the cuff. I'll see you guys later.
That's it.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks.
The question is, why? The answer is fairly obvious, but there is also some nuance to it, so allow me to pontificate for a bit. I don't think Jon was as scared of losing as many people do. He's a delusional narcissist who believes his career has been personally mandated by God.
I believe that God has anointed me to be a great fighter, and
the entirety of his identity is based on being an undefeated GOAT UFC fighter. But you can't become as successful as Jon has become without being willing to accept the possibility of losing. I could see Jon being able to recover from a loss, especially if it were a close decision. He could blame the judges, or getting older, or claim that it was God's plan for him to lose. The general things fighters do when they come up short. The problem is, I think Jon understood that if he lost to Aspinall, it wouldn't be by close decision. He'd get brutally knocked out in under 2 minutes. That was probably unacceptable to him.
And you know what I think a big worry might be for him? Because with Aspinall, he could potentially get knocked out. Like legitimately knocked out and put on his back and out cold. And I just don't know that he wants to have that visual of him in the world.
It's the same reason he didn't take the Ngannou fight either, in my view. The risk of getting knocked out and then eating a flying hammer fist while he was unconscious was just too much for him. Even if the odds of it happening were low, I don't think Jon was willing to roll the dice. Jon also probably understood that the odds of beating Tom weren't in his favor. At best, that fight is 50-50, but Jon would be giving up a lot against Tom, at least physically. Jon would have been older, smaller, slower, and have less punching power than Tom. There were some unknowns about Tom, like his cardio over 5 rounds and his durability, but they are just that, unknowns. The only physical advantage we can say Jon would have against Tom is reach advantage. But Tom has consistently been at a reach disadvantage throughout his career and has easily overcome it. So, there was basically no area in which Jon could claim to have a practical physical advantage over Tom. But there is yet another issue. Tom is still very much an unknown quantity.
Well, there's a lot of facets to my game that a lot of people haven't seen, which is great. That's the biggest advantage I've got in my game, is the fact that there's so many question marks about me.
Just for some perspective, it took Jon Jones longer to finish a 42-year-old Stipe Miocic than it has taken Aspinall to finish his last 5 opponents combined. This is a double-edged sword, as it means we haven't seen how Tom reacts if he gets taken into deep water. But it's also a nightmare for someone like Jon, who devotes so much time to watching tape of his opponents and forming game plans. He has virtually no data to work with.
I am this massive mystery to everybody, and nobody knows anything about me really, apart from, a couple of minutes here and there in the octagon, which is one of the biggest advantages I've got.
This is why I believe if Jon ever intended to fight Tom at all, he was stalling the negotiations for more time in the hopes that Aspinall might take another fight that would allow Jon to get any additional footage to work with. Even this is assuming that Jon was ever negotiating in good faith and wasn't just trying to waste some of Aspinall's prime out of spite. With all of that said, there is another element to this story that needs to be talked about as it relates to Jon Jones's retirement, and I think it's the most interesting one of all. That being the misdemeanor charges that were recently filed against him, stemming from an incident that happened in February of this year. Before I get into this, I want to make it clear that we're still at the stage of these events where the details aren't totally clear. so I'm going to use the word allegedly quite a bit. What we do know for sure is shortly after Jon's retirement was announced by Dana White, Jeff Grammer of the Albuquerque Journal reported that Jones was facing a misdemeanor charge of leaving the scene of an accident in February. I'm just going to quote the article because it's not particularly long and we can sum up the accusations a bit later. Quote, "The criminal complaint stated an Albuquerque police officer was investigating a traffic crash near San Mateo and Lomas when she came across a woman in the front passenger seat of one of the cars exhibiting signs of significant intoxication and lacking clothes from the waist down. The woman reportedly said Jones was the driver but fled the scene on foot. She then called Jones, the complaint stated, and a police service aide spoke to the man on the other end of the call believed to be Jones. He appeared to be heavily intoxicated and made statements implying his capacity to employ lethal force through third parties to the PSA, the court record stated. The PSA requested backup after what was believed to be a threat, when a police officer then talked to Jones and said similar allusions to violence were made. The man on the phone never answered direct questions about whether he was Jones, the complaint stated. When interviewed in person a few days after the crash, Jones said the woman found in the car had left his house earlier in the day intoxicated and called him after getting in the crash, at which time Jones said the person she handed the phone to immediately opened the conversation with unprofessional language, which led him to doubt the legitimacy of the individual's claim. The woman later told police she drank alcohol and consumed mushrooms at Jones's house, and recalled needing to change her clothes at his house, and her next recollection was being at the scene of a traffic accident. She said the last person she remembered driving her car was Jones, the court record indicated. Police said Jones called the woman's phone 13 times from the time of the crash until 11:34 a.m. the following morning, and that text messages from his phone were included, though could not be captured in call detail records. The police report indicated the crash happened February 21, but also in one place stated an officer conducted follow-up interviews on January 24. End quote. Interestingly, this story was only uncovered because the aforementioned journalist, Jeff Grammer, saw the news of Jon's retirement and thought the timing was suspicious. So he immediately started checking police records.
Jeff Grammer tells me he's sitting there, he sees the news of Jon Jones's retirement, and amazingly, as an incredible reporter, says, hey, let me just look up Jon Jones's name, Jonathan Jones, in the Albuquerque police records and see if anything comes up. And voila, there's this incident from February. What?
That is objectively funny. Imagine being so synonymous with crashing your car that a reporter hears about your retirement and their first instinct is to see if you've crashed your car again. And then they find out that you've been charged with fleeing the scene of a car crash 4 days ago. What is less funny is that about a week before this event, Jon went on a very strange rant on Instagram Live, where he was borderline nonverbal and was also making remarks about people.
You get pissed off, disappointed. And as a dad, you just want to kill.
It's unclear how or even if these events are connected, but as with many things Jon Jones related, it was just part of a larger, more disturbing pattern. Following the news of the charges being filed against Jon, his lawyer issued a statement to Yahoo's Uncrowned, denying the allegations and saying the case was unlike anything he had ever seen before. But come on, this story is like a 6-way Venn diagram of things Jon Jones is infamous for. Drugs, alcohol, women who aren't his fiancée, car crashes, fleeing the scene of a crime, and threatening to kill people. If you describe this event to me without even mentioning Jon Jones or Albuquerque, he'd still be my first guess, and second place wouldn't even be close. Since Jon's attorney made his statement, the Albuquerque Police Department has made partial body cam footage of the car crash investigation public, and it generally seems to track with the claims made in the police report. The woman found in the passenger seat of the vehicle claims that Jon was the one driving, but then he ran away.
Hey, where'd he go? Where'd he go out from me? I have one of the drivers leaving the scene on foot, heading westbound on Lomas.
She also repeatedly states that it was, in fact, Jon Jones, the UFC fighter.
He was the one driving the vehicle. It's Jon Jones.
Jon Jones?
Mm-hmm. He was the one driving the vehicle.
And who's your friend?
My friend is Jon Jones.
Okay.
As she is being questioned, she is on the phone with a person alleged to be Jon and gives the phone to the police officer so they can speak with him.
Please talk to him. Please talk to him. This is a friend that's a friend of mine.
It's difficult to make out a lot of what is being said by the person on the other end of the line, but it does sound like Jon.
What's your name?
PSA Lopez. With the Albuquerque Police Department.
My brothers attacked the dreams, sisters, and cell phones.
And while the audio is fairly indistinct, there are times when the person on the phone makes references to his brothers who kill people for way less.
They don't waste their cases with just killing you or petty crimes. But they definitely listen to conversations like this, and some of them are bored enough to kill you. To kill you. My brothers, they kill people for way less.
And suggests that if anything happens to him, the woman being questioned will end up flat and dead.
Sometimes she's flat and dead.
I'm saying allegedly to be safe, but Jon did confirm that he was the person on the other end of the call when he was later interviewed by police. We're still pretty early into this process, so it may turn out that this really was a case of someone making a false allegation against Jon. But is that alternative that much better? Do you understand how deeply associated with DUIs you have to be that people in your home city are saying Jon Jones was driving as a way to get out of an arrest? And what does it say about Jon that he is still associating with people like that? If nothing else, it indicates an ongoing pattern of poor life choices. And at this point, what excuses can be made in Jon's defense? He's not a 20-something kid anymore. He's pushing 40 and is still getting mixed up in shit like this. If he hasn't fixed the problem by now, he probably never will. And it will probably only keep getting worse, especially now that Jon doesn't have fighting to fall back on. That is why his retirement is so consequential in my opinion. Jon has weathered worse controversies than this in the past, but it was always contingent upon his ability to fight and to win. The argument put forward by his defenders was that you could hate him for his personal issues, but you couldn't deny his greatness. Well, now you can. By ducking Tom, he has thrown his own greatness into question. The last decade of his career has been defined largely by a series of drug test failures, as well as avoiding the toughest fights available to him at the time. To cap it all off, he avoided potentially the most important and legacy-defining fight of his career, and went out with yet another criminal charge against him. It's one of the lowest notes that any fighter has left the sport on. Jon has put himself in a position that is so embarrassing that there might be no way to recover from it. It's such a disgraceful exit from MMA, I genuinely believe it would have been better for Jon's legacy if he fought Tom and lost. At least then, Jon could say that he wasn't afraid of Tom, that he went in there against the scariest guy in the division instead of running away. Even after the massive debacle that was Jones versus Miocic, he could have still been the figure to bring stability back to the division left in disarray by Ngannou's departure. There is a decent argument to be made that Tom Aspinall's 2 heavyweight title fights are better than Jon's. There is an argument that Tom is a better fighter than Jon, at least at this point in time. But without seeing them fight, we will never truly know. And it was a fight that almost every MMA fan wanted to see. Essentially, what Jon did was take a giant dump in the middle of the room, give everyone the middle finger, and then leave. And it's not just Jon that comes out of this looking bad. The UFC has been made to look incompetent and weak. Not only did they put the division on hold for years so that Jon could farm legacy points, they weren't able to make one of the most anticipated and important fights of all time.
The UFC is being made to look weak here. And I cannot believe I'm saying that, but I don't know what other conclusion you can possibly draw from one guy not really declaring he's done and kind of stringing everyone else along, you, me, and the UFC included. It's an unusual time.
Honestly, it kind of seems like they couldn't even figure out that Jon was going to retire despite him making his intentions known on social media.
And Jon Jones agreed to do the fight. So Jon Jones was offered the deal and accepted the deal.
The person I feel truly bad for in all of this is Tom Aspinall. Sure, he's the official UFC heavyweight champ now, but he didn't get that passing of the torch that he rightfully earned.
That would have, propelled me more than any other fight, but
he likely won't fight until sometime in October at the earliest.
Yeah. So is that the hope, October, December?
Yeah.
Which means he will have been on the shelf for over a year for no legitimate reason.
My job is fighting people. And I haven't been able to do that for almost a year for no reason.
Worst of all, he's not out of the woods yet. MMA is an incredibly unpredictable sport, even more so at heavyweight, where it only takes one punch or one wrong move to lose a fight. Tom has been the hammer so far, but he could just as easily end up being the nail. Then this becomes even more of a farce. That is to say nothing about X factors like injuries, illness, or other potential setbacks that fighters face all the time.
That's what I'd like to do. I mean, things can happen in MMA, as we know. I might get injured, somebody else might get injured, whatever.
No, I was just wondering.
That is why it was so important to either book Jones versus Aspinall or make Jon give up the belt in a timely manner. Real, long-term damage may have been done to the heavyweight division, which is already in one of the worst places it has ever been. Jon's retirement is a nuclear disaster that has dropped fallout beyond the borders of his own legacy and spread to the rest of the division as well as the UFC as a whole. That said, it's hard to imagine it going any other way. Jon's career has always been a story of self-sabotage, but maybe even more importantly, bringing other people down with him. You need look no further than all of the frustration, hardship, and heartbreak he put Daniel Cormier through. We're talking about the man who crashed his car into a pregnant woman and fled the scene of the crime. This is the same guy who beat the mother of his children in front of them until one of the kids had to get hotel staff to call the police. He's been arrested or charged with crimes more times in the last 5 years than he's fought in the UFC, and I think it's only going to get worse. As time goes by and Jon doesn't have fighting to fall back on, all people will have to talk about will be his controversies outside of the cage. And let's be honest, those aren't going to stop anytime soon. At the time of writing, Jon's latest legal issues are yet to be resolved. Maybe he'll be found guilty, maybe he'll be exonerated. Maybe, as has happened many times in the past, he'll skate by with some minor slap on the wrist. In the grand scheme of things, this specific incident is just one of many similar incidents that paint a portrait of a deeply troubled, if not outright evil human being. Jon Jones is on the short list of fighters that truly worry me with what the future holds for them. Now more than ever, considering he will no longer have fighting to distract him from his darker tendencies. This is a man who, even when he was at his peak, was struggling with addiction, displayed risk-seeking behavior, and had a general disregard for the safety of those around him. He's a violent narcissist with substance abuse problems, religious delusions, and a sadistic side. Does anybody think that that will get better with time? Has Jon shown that he's actually made any improvements in the problem areas of his life? Or do we keep getting new stories where he's intoxicated and threatening people with violence? How many videos have we seen in just the last few months where Jon is visibly drunk or clearly slurring his words?
What's that Italian phrase? Came, saw, and conquered. That's genuinely how I feel.
As I was writing this, Jon went on a bizarre morning tweet and delete spree that included about a dozen cryptic and incoherent posts, and also appeared to incriminate himself as the voice on the other end of the phone in the body cam footage. This sort of behavior didn't used to happen anywhere near as often as it is lately, so either the problem is getting worse, or Jon has stopped caring about hiding it. Both are scary proposals. What is it going to look like when this guy has no outlet for his violent impulses? What is going to happen when the boredom really sets in, or when the CTE finally shuts down that last neuron that was keeping him from going full-blown psycho? Or if he starts hearing fucking messages from God? I'm not saying that I know the answer. I can't tell you with certainty whether or not something catastrophic is going to happen with Jon Jones. I don't have a crystal ball and I can't predict the future. But what I can do is look at the past and the pattern of his behavior and try to gain insight into what the future may hold. Jon has been doing this for 13 years. Longer if you want to count some of his prior driving infractions. It's not just a case of making mistakes either. It's making the same mistakes over and over again. To dig even deeper into the True Detective quotes, he is bound to the disc and the loop. He is doomed to repeat his actions in a cycle that will never end. I think it's actually best summed up by Daniel Cormier from nearly a decade ago. Quote, "Sobering truth is, his history dictates and determines that the same thing is going to happen. That is his character. That is him at his core." End quote.
You'll do this again. Time is a flat circle.
Jon's retirement isn't just bad because he held up a division, ducked Tom Aspinall, or went out with a pending criminal case. It's bad because this has been the pattern of his entire career. He's a pathological self-saboteur. He had the opportunity to finish his career by breaking that cycle and being the GOAT that he always claimed to be. Instead, he ended up reinforcing all of the criticisms and negative perceptions people have always had about him. And as a result, he truly destroyed his legacy. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. And a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thank you. Squirt, Rusty Shackelford, Jackson, Fightback CBD, Mike Roballs, Bone CK, Mango Saver, Devil Stick Disco, Mad Maxburger, Gaius Anisha Patton, Scott Richmond, Mad Nexus, Random Candor, Fuzzy Yanus, Old Neon, Timothy Lee Peterson, Julius Caesar Has Jungle Fever, Wet Cigarette, Firebrand, Quasi, Sneps, Alex, and Neem.